Snoop Dogg walked calmly through the bright streets of an upscale neighborhood, known for its luxurious stores, trendy restaurants, and the constant presence of rich people displaying their possessions like trophies. It was a quiet evening, with a faint murmur of laughter and glasses of wine clashing on the tables outside. But while the atmosphere of ostentation prevailed, something caught his attention. He saw, in the distance, a scene that broke his heart and ignited his indignation. At the entrance of a famous restaurant, a humble man, with worn-out clothes and a look full of hunger and tiredness, was trying to explain something to the security guards guarding the door. He wasn't there to ask for charity. I didn't want handouts or attention. He just wanted something simple and essential, a meal. But even so, his presence seemed to be an insult to those who believed that this restaurant should be reserved only for the greats of society. The security guards, dressed in impeccable suits and with a cold, haughty expression, not only denied the man entry, but treated him with contempt, as if he were invisible, or worse, as if he were a nuisance. They laughed at his appearance, muttered sarcastic comments to each other, and sent him away, as if he were an intruder who dared to defy the rules of a world where he clearly didn't belong. The scene was so uncomfortable that even customers at nearby tables began to notice. Some just glanced over, while others pretended nothing was happening. After all, confronting injustice often means leaving one's comfort zone, and many prefer silence rather than getting involved. The man, in turn, maintained his dignity, even in the face of the humiliating words he received. He didn't scream, he didn't argue. He just tried, once again, to say that he just wanted something to eat, something simple, enough to alleviate his hunger. But the security guards, increasingly harsh, didn't listen. At that moment, he wasn't seen as a person with a story, a struggle, or a need. He was just a problem to be removed from the door of that place. Snoop Dogg watched everything from afar, and something inside him stirred. He was someone who knew well what it was like to be underestimated, ignored, or judged by your appearance. He knew what it was like to face a world full of prejudices, and most of all, he knew that every act of injustice, no matter how small, needs to be confronted. After all, respect should not be a privilege, but a universal right. The contrast between the humble man and the restaurant's customers could not be starker. While the man had only the clothes on his back and a hunger that was impossible to disguise, the customers showed off luxury watches, designer clothes, and laughed between sips of expensive wine. For them, that scene was perhaps just another momentary interruption in their night of fun. But for Snoop Dogg, it was a reflection of everything that is wrong in a world where people are often judged by their possessions rather than their character. The restaurant itself was almost an embodiment of exclusivity, with an imposing facade, a revolving door that seemed to separate the US from the Themi, and a menu that probably cost most people's week's worth of work. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered more than anything else, and where someone like this humble man was seen as an anomaly that needed to be quickly eliminated to preserve the image of the place. The atmosphere on that corner was one of embarrassment. Even those who tried to ignore the scene felt the tension in the air. It was as if everyone knew something was deeply wrong, but no one knew how to act. Well, almost no one. Because it was at that moment that Snoop Dogg decided to intervene. He couldn't just turn his back on that situation. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen it. He knew he needed to do something. And when Snoop took his first steps toward the restaurant's door, something changed in the air. The security guards, who were still laughing and mocking the man, didn't even notice who was approaching. To them, he was just another person, perhaps another problem to deal with, but they couldn't be more wrong. Can you imagine what was about to happen? Snoop Dogg, with all his fame, power, and influence, was about to face not just the security guards, but the entire culture of arrogance and exclusion that this place represented. And what happened next was something that no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted. But before I reveal Snoop's next move, let me ask, what would you do in a situation like this? Would you remain silent like most people, or would you have the courage to act? Because what Snoop Dogg did next not only turned the tables, but left everyone in the restaurant dumbstruck. And I promise, you won't want to miss the end of this story. And now, I want to hear from you. What would you do in Snoop Dogg's place? Would you have the courage to intervene in a situation like this? Have you ever seen something similar and perhaps were unsure what to do? Write in the comments. I read each one of them. And who knows, your experience or opinion may inspire other people who are watching this video right now. Respect is essential, something that we all deserve, regardless of our appearance, our conditions, or where we are. This story isn't just about Snoop Dogg, it's about each one of us. It's about how we choose to treat others and the impact our attitudes have on the world. Comment below what you think about this, because this space is for exchange, and I really want to hear your voice. And if you're as involved in this story as I am, don't forget to like this video. Not only does this help me bring you more stories like this, but it also shows that you believe in the power of justice and the importance of spreading messages like this. And of course, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapters, because here, each story brings a powerful and transformative lesson. Now, speaking of upcoming chapters, are you curious to know what Snoop Dogg did next? Believe me, what comes after this intervention goes beyond anything you can imagine. An attitude that not only changed that night, but left an impact that will be remembered for a long time. So, stay tuned, because the next part of this story will bring a surprising outcome that I guarantee will leave you speechless. Snoop Dogg, a living music legend, someone known for his talent, charisma, and above all his humanity, was there faced with a situation he could not ignore. Despite being a world-famous celebrity with a fortune that many could not even imagine, he was always someone who kept his feet on the ground, someone who never forgot his roots. And at that moment, seeing that humble man being treated with so much contempt, something inside him spoke louder. Snoop isn't just a pop culture icon, he is also a defender of justice and an example of generosity. He's been filmed paying for meals for homeless people, providing opportunities for young people in his community, and even anonymously helping those who need it most. But here, on that corner lit by fancy signs and shiny storefronts, he wasn't being treated like Snoop Dogg. He was just another man, dressed casually, trying to do the right thing. With his discreet posture and a gaze full of empathy, he slowly approached the scene. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. I didn't want to put on a show. He wanted to help that man in the simplest and most direct way possible. But what he didn't know was that, at that moment, he would also be the target of the same disrespect he was trying to combat. When he arrived at the restaurant's door, Snoop was greeted with the same look of disdain that the security guards had given the humble man. Without recognizing who he was, the employees judged him based on his appearance and the fact that he was intervening on behalf of someone who, in their opinion, did not deserve to be there. Snoop, with his calm posture and calm voice, tried to explain, "I just want to buy him something to eat. That's it." But the security guards, visibly uncomfortable with his presence, refused to listen. "Sir, this is not the place for that," one of the security guards replied with an almost mocking tone. "If he wants to eat, he can go somewhere else." The contempt in the man's voice was palpable, and the silence that took over those around him only amplified the tension. Snoop remained calm, but it was clear that inside he was outraged. He knew very well what it was like to be judged by appearance. He experienced this in his youth, when many saw him as just another kid from the streets with no future. And even after conquering the world, he still faced situations in which he was underestimated or treated with prejudice. And there he was, again faced with a situation that, unfortunately, was all too familiar. Meanwhile, the humble man, who was watching everything with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment, began to say, "Sir, there's no need. I don't want to cause trouble." But for Snoop, it wasn't about causing trouble. It was about doing the right thing. "Everyone deserves respect," Snoop responded, looking directly at the man. but with words that were clearly aimed at the security guards and everyone around who remained silent. "This isn't about money, it's about dignity." The security guards exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable, but did not give up. To them, Snoop was just another person who didn't understand the rules of that kind of place. "Sir, we ask that you do not insist," one of them said, this time with a firmer tone. But Snoop, being who he is, wouldn't give up that easily. He walked closer, took out his wallet, and with a calm gesture showed that he was willing to pay. "Here it is, whatever you want to charge. No matter the price, he'll eat it." It was at that moment that the restaurant manager arrived, clearly uncomfortable with the commotion that the situation was generating. He assessed Snoop from head to toe, with that look typical of someone who tries to measure a person's worth by the clothes they wear or the way they speak. And with a fake condescending smile, he said, "Sorry, sir, but our restaurant has a policy of not serving people who don't respect the environment." That sentence, said in a polite but prejudiced tone, was enough to make Snoop's blood boil. He knew exactly what the manager meant. He knew that that policy was not written anywhere except in the prejudice they held as an invisible rule. But Snoop didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a fuss. Instead, he looked the manager straight in the eye and said something no one there was expecting. "You guys are right about one thing. This place really doesn't respect the environment, because the environment should be about people, not who has the most expensive watch or the fanciest car." The silence that followed was almost deafening. All eyes were now on Snoop, but he wasn't worried about that. He was concerned about making a difference, even though at that moment the disrespect was so evident. And this is where things start to get really interesting, because what Snoop did next not only exposed the hypocrisy of the place, but also taught a lesson that these people would never forget. And you won't believe the impact this attitude had. But before I continue, tell me, how do you think Snoop should handle this? Comment here using the phrase "everyone deserves respect," because I want to know your opinion. After all, what happened next shows how a simple attitude can change everything, and you, like the rest of us, will want to know exactly how this story unfolded. The restaurant's security guards were the perfect picture of arrogance masked in smart uniforms. Their well-tailored suits and haughty expressions made it clear that for them, controlling who had the right to enter was more than just part of the job. It was a way of exerting distorted power, of showing that they were in charge. While the humble man tried, with what little dignity he had left, to order something as simple as a plate of food, they treated him as if he were a nuisance, something to be swept away so as not to pollute the environment. "Look who thinks they can eat here. Are you lost, friend?" said one of them, with a disdainful smile that made the other laugh. They weren't just denying the man's request, they were having fun at his expense, as if humiliating someone in public was some kind of entertainment for them. The man, clearly uncomfortable, muttered, "I just wanted some food. It doesn't have to be anything expensive, I can afford it." But he barely managed to finish the sentence before being interrupted. "Pay here." "Friend, do you have any idea how much a dish costs at this place? I think you'd better try your luck somewhere else, maybe at a stall on the corner." "This is a respectful restaurant, not a shelter," replied one of the security guards, while the other shook his head with an expression of false regret. Meanwhile, the restaurant manager appeared, attracted by the small commotion. He was a middle-aged man, wearing an impeccable suit and with an air of superiority that seemed to permeate the air around him. He walked to the door with calculated steps, holding on to a smile that seemed more like a mask to hide the contempt he felt. "What's the matter here?" he asked, with a tone of voice that made it clear he wasn't really interested in listening. One of the security guards leaned over to him and explained, with the confidence of someone who knew he had the boss's support. "Nothing much, sir. This man here just thought he could have dinner at our restaurant." The manager raised his eyebrows, as if the very thought was absurd. He turned to the humble man, sizing him up and down with a look that didn't hide his judgment. It was as if he was trying to calculate in a matter of seconds the man's value, or rather the lack thereof. "My dear," began the manager, with a fake smile and an exaggeratedly polite voice. "Unfortunately, our restaurant has certain standards to be maintained. I think it would be best for you to find another place that is more suitable for you." Snoop Dogg, who until then had been observing the scene in silence, finally decided to intervene. He stepped forward and with his imposing presence caught everyone's attention. But even so, the security guards and manager didn't seem to understand who he was. They looked at him with the same look of contempt, without even suspecting that they were facing one of the greatest legends in music. "He just wants to eat. Why is this a problem?" Snoop's voice was calm, but carried a tone that made it clear he wasn't there to accept excuses. The manager turned to him, once again wearing that condescending smile. "Sir, like I said, we have standards here. We can't just serve anyone who shows up at our door." Snoop shook his head in disbelief at what he was hearing. He knew that attitude had nothing to do with the restaurant's standards or policies. It was pure prejudice. The idea that some people are simply not worthy of being in certain places, of occupying certain spaces. "Standards," Snoop repeated, crossing his arms. "And those standards include humiliating someone who just wants to eat." The manager began to shift uncomfortably. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially by someone he believed was just another stranger. But still, he tried to maintain his arrogant stance. "Sir, I don't think you understand how things work here. Our audience is select, and we need to ensure that the environment is appropriate for our customers. I'm sure there are other places where he would be better received." While the manager spoke, the security guards looked at Snoop with the same air of superiority. They thought they were in control, that their words had some kind of weight or authority. But what they didn't know was that they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. Snoop looked at the humble man next to him, who now looked even more embarrassed, his eyes fixed on the ground. This was too much. Seeing someone treated like that, like they were nothing, like they had no value, was something he simply couldn't accept. "Let me tell you something," Snoop said, now looking directly at his manager, his voice a little firmer. "That man has more dignity in one finger than you have in this entire restaurant, and you will learn that today." The silence that took over the place was almost deafening. It was as if the world had stopped for a moment, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. The manager and security guards began to exchange nervous glances, but still maintained their arrogant masks. But Snoop was nowhere near done. What he did after that was something no one expected, something that completely changed the course of that night and left everyone speechless. Now, before we continue with the outcome of this story, I want to know, what do you think of this whole situation? Comment here with the phrase, "respect above all," to show that you believe no one deserves to be treated this way. And get ready, because what Snoop did next is going to surprise you and everyone who was at that restaurant. Snoop Dogg, now in the spotlight, didn't hesitate to take out his wallet and do what any decent person would do in a situation like that. He looked straight into the manager's eyes without any sign of hesitation and said, "How much does a meal here cost? I'll pay right now." His voice was calm but filled with determination, as if saying, "You won't stop me." He took out a black card, the kind that practically screams exclusivity, and placed it on the table next to the entrance. The security guards exchanged quick glances, now a little less confident than before, but still firm in their arrogant stance. The manager, although visibly uncomfortable, maintained his superior expression, as if he believed he was still in control. "Sir," he began, with a smile so fake it was almost offensive, "it's not a question of payment. It's a matter of preserving the restaurant's atmosphere. Our audience expects a certain level of sophistication, and some people just don't fit that standard." This phrase, loaded with prejudice and disguised as restaurant policy, was the final straw. The silence that followed was almost palpable, broken only by the distant sound of cutlery hitting plates on tables outside. Some people who were having dinner nearby started paying attention, curious about what was going on. A woman, sitting with her group of friends, glanced discreetly over her shoulder. A couple who were talking quietly suddenly stopped to watch. Everyone knew something was about to happen, but no one had the courage to get involved. Snoop took a deep breath, keeping calm, but anyone looking at him at that moment would see the outrage in his eyes. He turned to the humble man beside him, who now looked completely defeated, his gaze fixed on the ground. It was as if that succession of humiliations had drained any hope he might have had. "You don't have to be ashamed of anything," Snoop told the man, with a firmness that seemed to reverberate in the air. "They are the ones who should be ashamed." The manager, upon hearing this, took a small step back, as if being hit by an invisible wave of reality. But he quickly regained his composure and tried to end the matter. "If you don't mind, I think it would be better to take this situation elsewhere. We have rules here. Rules." That word sounded like a bitter joke in Snoop's mind. Rules created to exclude, to separate, to reinforce the idea that some people simply do not deserve the same rights and opportunities as others. He looked at the security guards, who were now visibly uncomfortable, and then at the manager, who was still trying to maintain his facade of authority. "Rules. These are not rules. This is prejudice," replied Snoop, his voice firm and full of frustration. "And what you are doing here is not about preserving anything. It is about humiliating someone who just wants to eat. It's about putting you in a position of power, where you feel like you have the right to say who deserves to be here and who doesn't." More people started paying attention. A man at a nearby table took out his cell phone and began discreetly recording. A waitress, who had gone to get something outside, suddenly stopped and stared, with an expression that mixed curiosity and embarrassment. It was as if everyone knew they were witnessing something important, something they couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, the manager was still trying to find a way out, but his confidence was fading. He pointed to the security guards and said, "Please resolve this. I don't want this to become a scene." But it was already too late. It had already turned into a scene, and Snoop knew it. He realized that the people around him were watching, that the entire restaurant was now paying attention, and, most importantly, he knew this moment was bigger than him, bigger than the manager, bigger even than the man he was trying to help. This was a reflection of a much larger problem, of a system that constantly devalues those who don't fit into superficial standards of wealth and status. The security guards, visibly more cautious now, stepped forward. But before they could say anything, Snoop raised his hand, asking them to wait. "Do you really think this is how things work?" He looked directly at the manager, and his voice was now louder, enough for everyone around him to hear. "Do you think you can treat people like this, and no one will do anything?" The manager tried to respond, but his voice trailed off. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Maybe it was the weight of the situation, maybe it was Snoop's steady gaze, or maybe it was the growing realization that he was completely wrong. And then something unexpected happened. The man with the cell phone, who was recording everything, stood up and said, "This isn't right. You can't treat people like that." His voice, although shaky, was full of determination. It was like a spark in a room full of gas. Other customers began to murmur, some nodding in agreement, while others just watched, trying to understand what they would do next. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. The manager, realizing he was losing control of the situation, took a step back, but Snoop didn't let him off the hook that easily. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and said, "I will pay for this meal, no matter what you think, no matter what rules you want to invent, but it won't end like this." What happened next completely changed the course of the night, and more than that, it left a mark that no one in that restaurant would ever forget. But before I reveal the next events, I want to know, if you were there, what would you do? Comment here with the phrase, "Respect is for everyone," and tell me how you would handle a situation like this. Because believe me, what Snoop did next will make you rethink everything about dignity and justice. The moment of tension was about to reach its peak. Snoop Dogg, until then maintaining a calm and controlled posture, knew he needed to take an action that would leave no doubt about what was happening there. He wasn't just defending the humble man at his side, he was defending something much bigger: respect, dignity, and the idea that no one has the right to humiliate another human being, regardless of their appearance or social status. With a calm but powerful gesture, Snoop took off his hat, revealing his iconic face. He looked directly at the manager, who was still trying to maintain his composure, but whose expression was already starting to waver. And then, with a calm but meaningful smile, Snoop said, "I guess you guys don't know who you're dealing with." At that moment, silence took over the restaurant. It was as if time had stopped. The manager, who moments before clinging to his false superiority, froze. His eyes widened almost comically as he tried to process what was happening. The security guards, who until then had behaved like arrogant guardians of the restaurant's standards, now seemed small, completely lost in the face of the revelation. Murmurs began to spread to nearby tables. "Is that him?" someone whispered, while others looked on in disbelief. Customers who were previously just watching from a distance now took out their cell phones, some to take photos, others to record the surreal scene unfolding. The waitress who was standing outside dropped the notepad she was holding, putting her hands to her mouth in a gesture of pure shock. The manager, finally managing to regain some of his voice, stammered, "Sir, I didn't know it was you." His attempt to explain himself sounded pathetic, almost childish. I didn't mean to offend. It was a misunderstanding." But Snoop wasn't interested in hearing empty excuses. He stepped forward, keeping his eyes fixed on the manager, and replied, "The problem isn't that you don't know who I am. The problem is that you think you know who he is." He pointed to the humble man beside him, whose eyes were now teary. "And you thought that gave you the right to treat him as if he were less." Snoop's words echoed through the restaurant, filled with a truth that no one could deny. The people who were sitting began to nod their heads, some in agreement, others visibly uncomfortable, as if they had just realized that they were also complicit in a system that normalizes this type of behavior. The manager, clearly desperate to fix the situation, tried a different approach. He gave a nervous smile and said, "Of course, sir, if you want, we can accommodate you right now." "It would be our pleasure." But before he could finish his sentence, Snoop interrupted him. "Now it's not about what you can do for us," he said, his voice carrying a calm that only made his words more powerful. "Now it's about what you've already done. It's about how you chose to treat someone who just wanted a meal." The security guards, who until then had been silent, finally decided to intervene. "Sir, please, we understand the misunderstanding. It won't happen again," one of them said, trying to sound convincing. But it was clear they were just trying to save face. Snoop gave a short, almost imperceptible smile and replied, "Do you think this is just a misunderstanding? No, my friends, this is a reflection of how you see the world. You judge people by the way they look, by the money you think they have, by the car they drive, and you think that makes you better? Let me tell you something. It just shows how small you really are." The humble man, who until that moment seemed to be trying to remain invisible, finally raised his head. Her eyes were full of tears, but there was also a glow of gratitude and renewed strength. Snoop put his hand on his shoulder and said, "You don't need their permission to exist, and no one can take away your dignity." At this point, the tension in the restaurant began to dissipate, but not in a comfortable way. It was as if everyone had been forced to face a truth they preferred to ignore. Some patrons got up and left, clearly uncomfortable with what they had just witnessed. Others remained, as if trapped by the need to see how it would all end. But the real twist was yet to come. Snoop, with his magnetic presence and sharp words, not only exposed the prejudice of the manager and security guards, but also made it clear that it would not be forgotten. And what he did next, well, it was something that no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted. Now I want to know, if you were there, how would you have reacted? Comment here with the phrase "dignity is priceless" to show that you believe no one deserves to be treated with disrespect. And get ready, because what comes next will leave you speechless and show how a simple attitude can change the course of an entire story. The silence that took over the restaurant after Snoop Dogg's words was almost deafening. No one dared to interrupt. No one had the courage to object. The manager, still trying to compose himself, didn't know whether to keep the fake smile on his face or admit his defeat. The security guards, now visibly uncomfortable, exchanged glances with each other, as if they were waiting for someone, anyone, to tell them what to do. But Snoop, with all the calm and authority that only someone like him could have, made the decision that would completely change the course of that night. He turned to the humble man beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and with a reassuring smile said, "Let's get out of here. This place doesn't deserve your presence." The simplicity of that sentence had a devastating impact. It was as if Snoop was saying, out loud, that a person's true worth has nothing to do with where they can or can't get in. He knew that leaving that restaurant with his head held high was the first step in transforming that moment of humiliation into an unforgettable lesson. As he and the man began to walk away, the gazes of customers and employees followed them, filled with a mixture of guilt, shame, and curiosity. Some tried to hide their discomfort by scrolling through their cell phones or looking at the dishes in front of them, but others couldn't look away. They knew they were witnessing something bigger than a simple argument in a luxury restaurant. Snoop took the man to a nearby restaurant, a simpler, more welcoming place where he knew there would be no barriers or judgments. There he ordered a full meal for the man, making sure he was treated with respect and dignity. But what Snoop did next is what really turned that event into something unforgettable. Sitting at the table, while waiting for the man to eat, Snoop took his cell phone out of his pocket and started recording. He didn't need an elaborate production or a rehearsed speech. He just looked at the camera and began to speak sincerely and firmly. "Today, I saw something that broke my heart. A man was judged, humiliated, and treated as if he wasn't worthy of entering a restaurant simply because he didn't fit the standards of whoever was inside. That's not right. Everyone deserves respect. Everyone deserves dignity, no matter what they look like, what their condition is, or where they come from." As he spoke, his voice was full of emotion, but also determination. He knew that those words needed to reach as many people as possible. He continued, "I know many of you have seen something similar and perhaps felt helpless. But I'm here to tell you that when you see injustice, you have the power to do something, even if it's small, even if it's just a gesture, because every action counts." Snoop then made a promise. He announced that he would make a generous donation to charities that work with homeless people, ensuring that others, like this man, would have a chance to be treated with the dignity they deserve. He also took the moment to expose the restaurant's behavior that had caused the entire situation without directly naming names, but making it clear the type of attitude he would not tolerate. The recording, which appeared to be just another informal Snoop Dogg video, quickly went viral. Within hours, the publication had millions of views, thousands of comments, and a wave of shares. People resonated with the message, feeling both outrage at the situation and relief that someone like Snoop was using his influence to make a difference. And then, as expected, the internet did what the internet does best. Someone who was at the restaurant that night recognized the location and confirmed the story. In a matter of minutes, the name of the restaurant was all over social media, and the hashtag Respeto para Todos began to appear in trending topics. The comments were a mix of outrage and support. People from all over the world began sharing their own experiences of discrimination and prejudice, while others applauded Snoop for his courage and compassion. "This is what we need more of in the world," one user wrote. "Someone who doesn't just talk the talk, but acts. Thank you, Snoop." The restaurant, on the other hand, felt the brunt of the repercussions almost immediately. Online reviews began to plummet, with people leaving harsh reviews about the service and the exclusionary policy they had been exposed to. Some regular customers even declared that they would never return to the place again. The manager and security guards, who had previously acted with so much confidence and superiority, now faced the consequences of their choices. But Snoop didn't do it out of revenge. He did this to teach a lesson, not just to those who were in the restaurant that night, but to everyone who saw or heard about the story. He wanted to show that even in moments of apparent powerlessness, it is possible to do something to combat injustice. And you, what do you think of this attitude? Have you ever witnessed something similar? Comment here with the phrase, "One attitude changes everything," to show that you believe in the power of small actions to transform the world. And get ready, because what happened after this wave of repercussions was even more impressive. I guarantee you won't want to miss the outcome of this story. Snoop Dogg, by taking the action he did that night, not only helped a man who had been humiliated, he shined a light on a larger problem, something we often choose to ignore. His action was a powerful reminder that no matter how much we try to justify it, prejudice and arrogance should never have a place in our society. The message he conveyed went far beyond that restaurant, far beyond that humble man who just wanted a meal. It was a slap in the face to a system that constantly judges people based on their appearance, the money they carry in their pockets, or the place where they were born. Snoop showed us that true wealth lies in how we treat others, especially those who have nothing to offer us in return. When Snoop Dogg finished his video and hit the post button, he knew he was about to start a wave that no one could stop. And he was right. The message of dignity, respect, and equality spread like wildfire. People from all over the world began sharing the video, commenting on how they had faced similar situations or seen others go through it. But it wasn't just the immediate impact that caught attention. The lesson left that night continued to echo days later. The restaurant, which initially tried to ignore the backlash, soon realized it was in an unsustainable position. It was no longer possible to pretend that nothing had happened. They issued a public statement apologizing and saying they would review their policies and train their employees. But honestly, at that point, the damage was already done. And while the restaurant struggled to deal with the storm of criticism, Snoop forged ahead, as he always has. He didn't expect an apology, nor did he care about the venue's belated attempt to salvage its reputation. What really mattered to him was that the man who was humiliated that night now had something that many had tried to take away from him: his dignity. Snoop Dogg ended that night with a lesson that cannot be ignored. A person's greatness is not in how much money they have, how many followers they have, or how powerful they appear to be. It's in how she chooses to treat others, especially when no one is looking. He reminded us that respect is not something that is given out of obligation, but rather because it is the right thing to do. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed something like this? Have you ever seen someone treated unfairly just because they looked out of place? Maybe you were even the victim of something like this. Share your story in the comments, because it's important that we talk about this. Use the phrase "karma never fails" to show that you also believe in the strength of good deeds and the poetic justice that the universe always makes a point of applying. And if you've made it this far, don't forget to leave a like. This helps spread this important message to more people. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, which show us the power of small attitudes and make us reflect on how we can make a difference in our everyday lives. But do you know what's most interesting? The story doesn't end here yet. Because what happened after the video went viral and Snoop Dogg started this global discussion was even more surprising. Do you want to know how this affected the life of that humble man? Or what else did Snoop do to turn this situation into an eternal lesson? Don't leave there, because the next part will leave your jaw dropped. Believe me, you won't want to miss it. If you've made it this far, it means this story has touched you in some way. And honestly, that's exactly the goal: to bring stories that make us reflect on the world around us, that remind us of the value of respect, dignity, and the importance of treating others with humanity. Now I have a special request for you. Show that you followed until the end by leaving a comment below with the phrase, "Respect is worth more than luxury." This simple action not only shows that you are part of our community, but also helps reinforce this powerful message for anyone who stops by and reads it. Let's spread the impact of this lesson together. And if you liked this story and want to see more content like this, don't forget to leave a like. It's quick for you, but it makes all the difference for the channel, helping to deliver stories like this to more people who need to hear these messages of empathy and justice. Oh, and of course, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future stories. Here, each video is designed to bring not only entertainment, but also reflections that can transform our view of the world. And before you go, there's one more incredible story waiting for you. The next video is now appearing on the screen, which I'm sure will surprise you as much as this one. So click now and continue with us on this journey of lessons and inspiration. Shall we go together? I'll see you in the next video.